Hello, this is Morel Benard with the continuation of the story, Wuthering Heights. And Wuthering Heights is coming to an end. It is. After this episode, there'll be the final episode. So this is the penultimate, I think the word is, episode. And then there will be the final episode. So, Wuthering Heights. Last words were, "Oh God, it is a long fight. I wish it were over." He began to pace the room, muttering terrible things to himself, till I was inclined to believe, as he said Joseph did, that conscience had turned his heart to an earthly hell. I wondered greatly how it would end. Though he seldom before had revealed this state of mind even by looks, it was his habitual mood. I had no doubt. He asserted it himself, but not a soul from his general bearing would have conjectured the fact. You did not when you saw him, Mr. Lockwood, and at the period of which I speak. He was just the same as then, only fonder of continued solitude, and perhaps still more laconic in company. For some days after that evening, Mr. Heathcliff shunned meeting us at meals, yet he would not consent formally to exclude Harrington and Cathy. He had an aversion to yielding so completely to his feelings, choosing rather to absent himself, and eating once in 24 hours seemed sufficient sustenance for him. One night, after the family were in bed, I heard him go downstairs and out at the front door. I did not hear him re-enter, and in the morning I found he was still away. We were in April then. The weather was sweet and warm, the grass as green as showers and sun could make it, and the two dwarf apple trees near the southern wall in full bloom. After breakfast, Catherine insisted on my bringing a chair and sitting with my work under the fir trees at the end of the house, and she beguiled Harrington, who had perfectly recovered from his accident, to dig and arrange her little garden, which was shifted to that corner by the influence of Joseph's complaints. I was comfortably revelling in the spring fragrance around and the beautiful soft blue overhead, when my young lady, who had run down near the gate to procure some primrose roots for a border, returned only half laden, and informed us that Mr. Heathcliff was coming in. And he spoke to me, she added, with a perplexed countenance. "What did he say?" asked Harrington. "He told me to be gone as fast as I could," she answered. "But he looked so different from his usual look that I stopped a moment to stare at him." "How?" he inquired. "Why, almost bright and cheerful. No, almost nothing. Very much excited and wild and glad," she replied. "Night walking amuses him, then," I remarked, affecting a careless manner, in reality as surprised as she was, and anxious to ascertain the truth of her statement, for to see the master looking glad would not be an everyday spectacle. I framed an excuse to go in. Heathcliff stood at the open door. He was pale, and he trembled. Yet certainly he had a strange, joyful glitter in his eyes that altered the aspect of his whole face. "Will you have some breakfast?" I said. "You must be hungry. rambling about all night. I wanted to discover where he had been, but I did not like to ask directly. No, I'm not hungry, he answered, averting his head and speaking rather contemptuously, as if he guessed I was trying to divine the occasion of his good humour. I felt perplexed. I didn't know whether it were not a proper opportunity to offer a bit of admonition. I don't think it right to wander out of doors, I observed. Instead of being in bed, it is not wise, at any rate this moist season. I dare say you'll catch a bad cold or a fever. You have something the matter with you now. Nothing but what I can bear, he replied, and with the greatest pleasure, provided you'll leave me alone. Get in, and don't annoy me. I obeyed, and in passing, I noticed he breathed as fast as a cat. Yes, I reflected to myself, we shall have a fit of illness. I cannot conceive what he has been doing. That noon he sat down to dinner with us and received a heaped up plate from my hands as if he intended to make amends for previous fasting. I've neither cold nor fever, Nelly, he remarked, in allusion to my morning speech, and I'm ready to do justice to the food you give me. He took his knife and fork and was going to commence eating when the inclination appeared to become suddenly extinct. He laid them on the table, looked eagerly towards the window, then rose and went out. We saw him walking to and fro in the garden while we concluded our meal. And Earnshaw said he'd go and ask why he would not dine. He thought we had grieved him some way. Well, is he coming? Cried Catherine when her cousin returned. Nay, he answered, but he's not angry. He seemed really pleased indeed. Only I made him impatient by speaking to him twice, and then he bid me to be off. He wondered how I could want the company of anybody else. I set his plate to keep warm on the fender, and after an hour or two he re-entered, when the room was clear, in no degree calmer, the same unnatural, it was unnatural, appearance of joy under his black brows, the same bloodless hue, and his teeth visible now and then in a kind of smile, his frame shivering, not as one shivers with chill or weakness, but as a tight-stretched cord vibrates, a strong thrilling rather than trembling. I will ask what is the matter, I thought, or who should? And I exclaimed, have you heard any good news, Mr. Heathcliff? You look uncommonly animated. Where should good news come from to me? He said. I'm animated with hunger, and seemingly I must not eat. Your dinner is here, I returned. Why won't you get it? I don't want it now, he muttered hastily. I'll wait till supper. And Nelly, once for all, let me beg you to warn Harrington and the other away from me. I wish to be troubled by nobody. I wish to have this place to myself. Is there some new reason for this banishment? I inquired. Tell me, why you are so queer, Mr. Heathcliff. Where were you last night? I'm not putting the question through idle curiosity, but you are putting the question through very idle curiosity, he interrupted with a laugh. Yet I'll answer it. Last night I was on the threshold of hell. Today I am within sight of my heaven. I have my eyes on it. Hardly 3 feet to sever me. And now you better go. You'll neither see nor hear anything to frighten you if you refrain from prying. Having swept the heart and wiped the table, I departed, more perplexed than ever. He did not quit the house again that afternoon, and no one intruded on his solitude till at 8 o'clock. I deemed it proper, through unsummoned, to carry a candle and his supper to him. He was leaning against the ledge of an open lattice, but not looking out. His face was turned to the interior gloom. The fire had smouldered to ashes. The room was filled with the damp, mild air of the cloudy evening, and so still that not only the murmur of the beck down Gimmerton was distinguishable, but its ripples and its gurgling over the pebbles, or through the large stones which it could not cover. I uttered an ejaculation of discontent at seeing the dismal grate, and commenced shutting the casements one after another, till I came to his. Must I close this? I asked, in order to rouse him, for he would not stir. The light flashed on his features as I spoke. Oh, Mr. Lockwood, I cannot express what a terrible start I got by the momentary view. Those deep black eyes, that smile, and ghastly paleness. It appeared to me not Mr. Heathcliff, but a goblin, and in my terror I let the candle bend towards the wall, and it left me in darkness. Yes, close it, he replied in his familiar voice. There, that is pure awkwardness. Why did you hold the candle horizontally? Be quick and bring another. I hurried out in a foolish state of dread and said to Joseph, the master wishes you to take him a light and rekindle the fire. For I dared not go in myself again just then. Joseph rattled some fire into the shovel and went. But he brought it back immediately with the supper tray in his other hand, explaining that Mr. Heathcliff was going to bed, and he wanted nothing to eat till morning. When we heard him mount the stairs directly, he did not proceed to his ordinary chamber, but turned into that with the panelled bed. Its windows, I mentioned before, it's wide enough for anybody to get through, and it struck me that he plotted another midnight excursion, of which he had rather we had no suspicion. Is he a ghoul or a vampire? I mused. I had read of such hideous incarnate demons. And then I set myself to reflect how I had tended him in infancy, and watched him grow to youth, and followed him almost through his whole course, and what absurd nonsense it was to yield to that sense of horror. But where did he come from? The little dark thing, harboured by a good man to his bane, muttered superstition as I dozed into unconsciousness. And I began, half dreaming, to weary myself with imagining some fit parentage for him, and repeating my waking meditations. I tracked his existence over again with grim variations. At last, picturing his death and funeral, of which all I can remember is being exceedingly vexed at having the task of dictating an inscription for his monument, and consulting the sexton about it, and as he had no surname, and we could not tell his age, we were obliged to content ourselves with a single word: Heathcliff. That came true. We were. If you enter the kirkyard, you read on his headstone only that, and the date of his death. Dawn restored me to common sense. I rose and went into the garden as soon as I could see, to ascertain if there were any footmarks under his windows. There were none. He has stayed at home, I thought, and he'll be all right today. I prepared breakfast for the household, as was my usual custom, but told Harrington and Catherine to get theirs ere the master came down, for he lay late. They preferred taking it out of doors, under the trees, and I set a little table to accommodate them. On my re-entrance, I found Mr. Heathcliff below. He and Joseph were conversing about some farming business. He gave clear, minute directions concerning the matter discussed, but he spoke rapidly and turned his head continually aside, and had the same excited expression, even more exaggerated. When Joseph quitted the room, he took his seat in the place he generally chose, and I put a basin of coffee before him. He drew it nearer, and then rested his arms on the table, and looked at the opposite wall, as I supposed, surveying one particular portion up and down, with glittering, restless eyes, and with such eager interest that he stopped breathing further in half a minute together. "Come now," I exclaimed, pushing some bread against his hand. "Eat and drink that while it is hot. It has been waiting near an hour." He didn't notice me, and yet he smiled. I'd rather have seen him gnash his teeth than smile so. "Mr. Heathcliff, master," I cried, "don't, for God's sake, stare as if you saw an unearthly vision. Don't, for God's sake, shout so loud," he replied. "Turn round and tell me, are we by ourselves?" "Of course," was my answer. "Of course we are." Still, I involuntarily obeyed him, as if I was not quite sure. With a sweep of his hand, he cleared a vacant space in front among the breakfast things, and leant forward to gaze more at his ease. Now, I perceived he was not looking at the wall, for when I regarded him alone, it seemed exactly that he gazed at something within 2 yards distance, and whatever it was, it communicated apparently both pleasure and pain in an exquisite extremes. At least the anguished yet raptured expression of his countenance suggested that idea. The fancied object was not fixed either. His eyes pursued it with unwearied diligence, and even in speaking to me were never weaned away. I vainly reminded him of his protracted abstinence from food, if he stirred to touch anything in compliance with my entreaties, if he stretched his hand out to get a piece of bread. His fingers clenched before they reached it, and remained on the table, forgetful of their aim. Join me, Morel Benard, for the last video of Wuthering Heights. Join me, look out, join me for the last video, the concluding video of Wuthering Heights. I'll see you then. Join me, next video, last video, Wuthering Heights. See you then. Bye.